AIC had then and now a terrific reputation. It also had, I think, a key tenet of educational opportunity that includes aspiration. And never to miss the fact that the number of people who were in public office who had gone through the doors of AIC, the number of writers in local media was very, very impressive to me at the time. And I remember getting that letter of acceptance. And I can't tell you how elated I was. I mean, in my family, we had only been here for, at that time, about 60 years on one side. So to get a letter of acceptance to college, we all thought it was the biggest deal. On the day that I graduated from AIC, remember the party? We had my grandmother, my aunt, and all. They were just so happy. I think they were happier for me than I was for myself. Well, one of the most famous ones that I had here at AIC was I organized the George McGovern for President campaign. And while we were not successful nationwide, we were very successful here in Western Massachusetts, and part of the launch took place here on campus. But I also was in that library every night. I worked at Mercolino's Bakery after school, commuted to college. And I will tell you that being a member of the National Honor Society here at AIC is something that I regularly boast about to my children. And in 1971 here at AIC, I received the school's Political Science Award as a junior. So those were both monumental achievements for somebody who was just looking for a path to success. Well, recall that this college was actually founded by and for immigrants, and I think it also had a stellar reputation based upon the idea that for many, including myself, this was the first opportunity for a lot of the children and grandchildren of immigrants to attend college. So I think in that vein, for me, I simply saw it as opportunity would beckon. When you consider that AIC is actually located right in the geographic center of the city of Springfield, it is something that people lose sight of. They often will look at the downtown or they'll look at one of the far-reaching neighborhoods. This is actually the center of the city right here. And I think that just not in terms of economics, but in terms of the teaching core, in terms of those who over many years, mentors to me, had been part of the AIC family. I think all of it has an extraordinary influence on economics across Western Massachusetts. And again, back to a very important term, opportunity. Well, local politics is always more upfront. You really bump into your constituents literally every hour of every day. And as in the mayor's office, you're the chief decider. So Springfield has a strong mayor form of government. So not only are you the chairman of the school committee, but you're technically the head of the police department, the fire department, all of the other services. And the Plan A form of government really says that there's only one full-time elected official in Springfield in local government, and that's the mayor. So I think that from the city council chamber to the mayor's office to Congress and to the Ways and Means Committee, it's been a pretty steep climb, but I think that many of the lessons I learned along the way have helped pay off in a large investment that I've now had a chance to participate in. Well, the responsibility is to oversee part of the most complex aspects of federal governing, and that includes how to raise the necessary revenue to administer the federal government. So it is a tax writing committee. It also has broad responsibility for Medicare, Social Security, management of the public debt, trade, tariffs, and the tax portion of Medicaid. So it's a very small working committee, but it has profound consequence. People can always outline great vision. I have to come up with the plan. Well, when you consider that in American history, you've had 8 presidents who have served on the committee, including the author of our Constitution, James Madison, that all revenue measures have to originate in the House of Representatives, and within the House of Representatives, they originate in the Ways and Means Committee. So it is the longest standing committee in congressional history. It met for the first time in 1789, just as our Constitution was established. And it's had some pretty far-reaching moments when you consider that whether it was financing the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, all of those measures are exceedingly complex, and you have to sift and sort to try to get some sort of a reasonable answer. It is actually to oversee the revenue of the United States. And again, the Senate does not originate revenue. The House of Representatives does. And again, within the House, it is the Ways and Means Committee. There's a very important, if arcane, procedure in establishing legislation. It's called the chairman's mark. And the chairman is the one who then determines the parameters of how the debate is to be pursued. And in that sense, again, of great consequence. Well, clearly, I'm hoping that a more equitable tax system where we can address what is one of the most burgeoning issues in America right now, and it is the greater concentration of wealth in the hands of fewer people. Democrats and Republicans, I think, and economists would all agree. We might disagree on why it has happened, but there is very little dispute as to what has happened. In addition, I'm going to go hard on the notion of retirement savings when you consider that there are 10,000 boomers that retire every day. There are 55 million Americans who get up and go to work every single day in America who are not in a qualified retirement plan. So we've had some success already on the retirement front. I intend to fully protect the guarantee of Medicare and Social Security. It has fundamentally changed the way senior citizens have grown to their aged years, and also to improve, once again, what I think has been a substantial accomplishment, and that's the Affordable Care Act, which the Ways and Means Committee wrote the majority of. Well, you know, sometimes it's important to point out that there were presidents that have served, but also Thaddeus Stevens served as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. He was the individual who oversaw congressional reconstruction in the aftermath of the Civil War. So there are legislators who sometimes have a more profound impact than presidents do at certain intervals of American history. And I hope that when I am able to look back and protecting Social Security and talking about retirement savings and addressing some of the real issues that people confront every day, never to miss the idea, too, that I played, I think, a pretty important role in establishing the Good Friday Agreement in the north of Ireland. When I started on this, there were 30,000 British soldiers in an area the size of the state of Connecticut, watchtowers, a heavy presence of a militarized state. Today, there's no border. You can travel from Belfast to Dublin in relatively peaceful terms. And it is, I think, an example of the reach and role of the United States. And America was a guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement in the north of Ireland. And I'd like to think in some measure that I've had an impact on that. Well, I'd like to think that it's pretty neat in the same day when I can greet friends at the luncheonette or the 7-Eleven and be on my way to meet with the Speaker of the House or the President of the United States or vice versa. Pretty amazing. And I think that people will say, well, should I call you Mr. Chairman or should I call you Congressman? I'd say, Richie always works. And I've never forgotten that. So I think that one of the nice things about the career that I've had is that at a different time, the elevator operator cheered for me and the car mechanic cheered for me. And I think that the individual who worked in the street department and people in all walks of life, they were part of my aspiration. And I just think it was pretty nice to have their applause. At the same time, meeting with presidents and Speaker of the House and prime ministers of different countries. I'd like to be able to change the tone of the conversation as to the way we talk to each other in America today, or at least in some small or significant manner, have some influence on it. I've seen a substantial change in the politics of our country where now people that disagree with you are dismissed. And that has not been the way that I've pursued public policy, or that's not the way that I've pursued career advances. I think that just because you can talk more loudly or shout more loudly, it never suggested you were right. And I hope that social media, the consequence of cable news, talk radio, it amplifies conflict in America. And I think that Justice Holmes, he did say that conflict might be the core of life, but getting things done means that the cooperation ought to be the focal point of our discussions. Well, I still hold the esteemed title of lecturer at the University of Massachusetts, and one of the nice things, I think, for me, whether it was at the local colleges, at the university, or even teaching high school students, I never walked into a lecture, nor do I now, where I haven't prepared. So on Sunday night, you can be sure that between 7 and 9 o'clock, I'm preparing a lecture. And I think that that ought to be a minimal requirement to make sure that you want to keep those students on their toes, but you want the students to keep you on your toes, and it's refreshing. And I don't think that for a moment, when you're helping to build the next generation of political leaders or thought leaders in America, that you want to do anything but be prepared. I think probably the most important moment was my mom was involved in politics, at least on the periphery, and part of it was a neighborhood thing. But they always seemed to know who was running for this office or that office. And on the day before the presidential election in 1960, my mother, who was a switchboard operator at City Hall, she was smart enough that day to keep my sisters and I home from school to see Jack Kennedy. I can't tell you the excitement that the city felt. You know, he came down from Westover, down Carew Street, and onto the steps of the Springfield City Hall. I was in the 6th grade, and I escaped my grandmother's grasp because she was actually the one standing with us. And there we were with homemade signs. And about 72 hours later, Jack Kennedy was the president-elect of the United States. So just to look up there underneath the bell tower and recall that you saw this great sense of idealism and the things that you could really do for the world. For whatever reason, I've just never lost sight of it. If I were asked today, like that 6th grader who was in the steps of the City Hall to see Jack Kennedy in 1960, I would say, have a dream and have a plan.